Okay, so you're thinking about those Avora bifold doors.
Mm,
Want to open up your space a little bit
yeah, they can really change the whole feel of a room, bring in so much more light.
and give that kind of sleek, modern look.
Exactly. A lot of people are choosing these doors now to kind of connect their indoor and outdoor spaces, really make it flow.
I can definitely see why, but I'll be honest, I'm a little intimidated by the installation process.
I hear you. I mean, any kind of door installation can be a bit tricky if you're not familiar with it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So that's why we're doing this deep dive today.
absolutely. We've got the Avora installation guides right here, and we're going to break it all down for you.
No need to wade through all those technical details yourself,
We're going to highlight all the essential steps, the key things to watch out for.
and hopefully save you some headaches along the way.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut to a smooth, professional installation.
Love it. So where do we even begin with these bifold doors? What's the first thing we need to know?
Well, the Avora guides actually emphasize a really important point right off the bat, and it's something that a lot of people miss, which can cause major frustration later on.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
It's all about the rollers, those little mechanisms that allow the doors to glide smoothly.
Right, makes sense. But what about them?
You absolutely have to install them into the frame before you put the frame pieces together.
Oh, wow. Really? So before you even start building the frame itself?
Yes. Seriously, this is like the golden rule of bifold door installation. Trust me on this one.
Okay, I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
Rollers, first, frame assembly, second.
Yeah.
Got it. But why is that so important?
Because trying to get those rollers in after the frame is already built, oh man, it's a nightmare.
I can imagine.
You're contorting yourself trying to reach into these tight spaces. Sometimes you can't even get them in at all.
And then you have to take the whole frame apart.
Exactly. You end up undoing all your hard work just to put these little rollers in.
That's frustrating.
It is. So the Avora guides really hammer this home for a reason.
Yeah.
It's such a simple thing, but it can save you so much hassle later on.
Okay, rollers installed before frame assembly. Check. So what's next?
Once you've got those rollers in place, you can start thinking about the opening itself.
Right where the doors will actually go.
Exactly. And there are a few key things you need to check before you even think about putting that frame in.
Like what?
First, make sure you have enough clearance around the opening. The guides specify that you need an extra 1/4 inch of space on all sides.
So 1/4 inch to the top, the bottom, and both sides of the opening.
Yep. That extra space is crucial for a few reasons. It prevents the doors from binding or rubbing against the frame.
Right, so they can move freely without any obstruction.
Exactly. It also allows for any slight adjustments that you might need to make later on.
So it's kind of like giving the doors some breathing room.
Exactly. Don't skimp on that clearance. It's really important.
Okay, 1/4 inch clearance noted. What else should we be looking at?
This one's super important too. Make sure all the surfaces are level.
Level as in perfectly straight.
Yes. You need to check the sides of the opening and the floor where the bottom track will sit. If anything is even slightly off, it can throw everything out of whack.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, if the opening isn't level, the doors won't hang properly. They might not open or close smoothly.
So they could get stuck or drag.
Exactly. And it can also mess with the locking mechanism.
Oh, so they might not lock securely.
Right. So a level foundation is absolutely essential for smooth bifold operation.
Level surfaces it is.
Mm-hmm.
And before we even get to this point, there's something else we need to do right.
Yes. Don't forget to measure your rough opening carefully.
Rough opening meaning the actual space where the doors will go.
Yep. The guides are very specific about this. They want you to measure the height in at least 3 different places and the width and depth in at least 2 places each.
Wow. They really want you to be precise.
They do, and there's a good reason for it. If those measurements aren't consistent, it could indicate that the opening itself is out of square.
And that could cause problems down the line.
Absolutely. So triple check those measurements before you move on.
Okay, so we've got the roller tip, the clearance, the level surfaces, and those all-important measurements. Now we're ready to start putting the frame together right.
Almost. Remember those rollers we talked about? Well, now's the time to make sure they're properly installed in the top frame.
Right, we put those in before we assembled anything.
Exactly. The Avora guides specifically call out the 65 series top roller here. This particular roller is designed for the top track, and it's really important for smooth operation.
So it helps the door glide effortlessly along the track.
Precisely. Make sure it's securely in place before you move on to the next step.
Okay, top frame with a 65 series roller installed. Check. What comes after that?
Now you can connect the top frame to the side frames and the bottom track. You're basically building the perimeter of your new doorway. Right.
creating the structure that the doors will attach to.
Exactly. And once that's done, you'll need to attach the 65 series bottom roller to the bottom of the door panel itself.
So get matching rollers on the top and bottom of the door.
Yep. And then you'll slide the 304 stainless channel into the bottom track. This channel provides a smooth pathway for that bottom roller to move along.
So it's all about minimizing friction, ensuring everything glides smoothly.
Exactly. The guides really emphasize the importance of smooth movement at both the top and bottom. It's key to the whole bifold experience.
Okay, so the frame is up, the rollers are in place. Now, how do we actually attach the door panels to this whole thing?
Carefully.
Haha, I bet. What are the steps involved?
Well, first you'll need to position the assembled door frame against the side frame of the opening. Make sure it's aligned correctly, remembering that 1/4-inch clearance we talked about earlier.
Right. Give those doors some space to breathe.
Exactly. And then you'll use the provided 83 hinges to secure the two frames together.
So the hinges are what create that connection between the door panel and the overall frame.
Yep. The guide will tell you exactly how many hinges to use and where to place them. It'll depend on the size of your doors and how many panels you have.
Okay, so hinge placement is important too. And speaking of placement, didn't we already talk about installing rollers earlier?
We did. But there's another step that specifically mentions rollers in relation to the door panels themselves. It's all about making sure those rollers are in the right spot depending on how many panels your doors have.
Oh, interesting. So the placement varies.
It does. For doors with 3 or 4 panels, you'll typically find the rollers positioned between the second and third panel.
Okay, so they're not right at the edge of the door.
Right. And for 5-panel doors, you'll have rollers between the second and third panel, and then another set between the fourth and fifth panel.
I see. So the more panels you have, the more rollers you need to distribute the weight evenly.
Exactly. It helps to ensure that the doors glide smoothly, even with that extra weight.
Makes sense. So now we've got the panels hung, the rollers are in the right place. What's next?
Time for the finishing touches, handles, latches, things like that.
Ah, the parts that actually make the doors functional.
Exactly. You'll attach the U.S. door handles 91 and 91W to the designated operating panels. The guide will show you which handle goes where.
Okay, so those are specific handle models for these doors.
Yep. And then you'll install the BX door closed latch 8665. That provides the secure locking mechanism.
Right, so you can actually close and lock the doors.
Exactly. And that's pretty much it for the main installation.
Wow, that seems pretty straightforward.
It is for the most part, but there might be some minor adjustments you need to make to get everything working perfectly.
Oh, like what kind of adjustments?
Well, first you'll want to check the gap between the door panels and the frame.
You mean the space between the door and the frame when it's closed?
Yep. Ideally, that gap shouldn't exceed 1 millimeter.
1 millimeter, so very tiny.
Very tiny. And if the whole door assembly seems a bit too high, you can lower it using a 6 millimeter hex socket wrench.
Okay, so a little bit of fine-tuning might be needed.
Exactly. The guide has a warning, though. Be careful not to damage the 5 small metal pieces that are part of the adjustment mechanism.
Good to know. Wouldn't want to break anything at this stage. What other adjustments might we encounter?
The guide also talks about adjusting the lower pulley assembly, which is on the left-hand side, and the upper pulley assembly, which is usually on the right.
So separate adjustments for the top and bottom mechanism.
Right. Now, they do say that usually you shouldn't need to adjust the upper pulley, but if you do, you can use that same 6 millimeter hex socket wrench.
And which way do you turn it to make the adjustments?
Clockwise will decrease the force, and counterclockwise will increase it. So if the doors feel a bit too stiff, you can loosen it up a bit by turning the wrench counterclockwise.
Interesting. So there's quite a bit of flexibility in terms of fine-tuning the operation.
There is. You can really dial in that perfect balance and smooth movement. And speaking of adjustments, sometimes the lock itself can be a bit finicky.
Oh yeah, sometimes new locks can be stiff or not engaged properly.
Exactly. The guide actually has a helpful tip for that. If you find that the lock isn't turning all the way, check to make sure that the little switch on the mechanism is fully slid to either the right or the left.
Oh, so that might just be a simple adjustment.
Yep. Often that little switch isn't fully engaged, and a quick nudge with a screwdriver will do the trick.
That's a good one to remember. What about the height of the individual panels? What if they're not all perfectly aligned?
The guides cover that too. To raise a panel, you'll need to loosen the top screw on the hinge and then fasten the lower screw. And to lower a panel, you do the opposite. Fasten the top screw and loosen the lower one.
So it's a pretty straightforward adjustment.
It is. Just remember top screw for lowering, bottom screw for raising.
Got it. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on one more thing. the swing direction of the doors.
Yes, whether you want them to swing inwards or outwards.
Does that affect the installation process?
It does. If you want the doors to swing outwards, the shorter side of the frame needs to be on the outside of your house. And if you want them to swing inwards, that shorter side goes on the inside.
So it's all about how you orient that main frame.
Exactly. And the guides also mention that there are different types of frames, thermal break frame and non-thermal break frame.
Okay, and what's the difference between those?
Well, the placement of the pre-drilled holes for installation can vary slightly between the two.
So you need to know which type of frame you have before you start attaching it.
Absolutely. Check the label or the instructions to be sure.
Great tip. Well, I think we've covered just about everything, haven't we?
I think so. We've gone from that crucial first step of installing the rollers all the way through to those final adjustments and even some troubleshooting tips.
And I have to say, it doesn't seem nearly as daunting as I thought it would be.
No, not at all. As long as you follow the Avora guides carefully and pay attention to those key details, you should be good to go.
And remember, folks, that golden rule. Rollers in the frame before you assemble anything.
Absolutely. That's the #1 takeaway from today's deep dive.
Now, for those of you who want even more detail or need to see those diagrams firsthand, you can head over to the Avora Doors website.
That's avorodoors.com. They've got tons of information there.
And if you run into any trouble during your installation, you can always reach out to their customer support team.
They're available by phone at 1-512-522-2284, or you can email them at info@avoradoors.com.
So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
They're there to help.
Now, before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought. As you embark on this project, really take a moment to imagine the transformation that these bifold doors will bring to your space.
Think about how that flood of natural light will change the feel of the room.
How those doors will seamlessly connect your indoor and outdoor areas.
It's not just about functionality, it's about enhancing your everyday experience.
It's about creating a new flow, a new energy in your home.
So go forth, install those doors with confidence, and enjoy the beautiful results.